Hey, hello. My name is Brianna Camilanato. I am the Social Change Chair of the Paul Activities Board, and this is Rise Up. It's probably one of my favorite events that the Social Change Committee is doing this quarter. So, tonight we're going to have FreeQuency, who is an amazing spoken word poet. They are going to be doing a great performance. Highly recommend searching them on YouTube to see their other performances, TED Talks, all that. Make sure if you are a DePaul student to check into the event with the QR code on the screen. You can see. So if you scan the QR code or check in on D-Hub, you will be entered in a little contest we're doing. So with this, since it is Black History Month, we are highlighting some of our favorite Black-owned businesses in Chicago. So some of them will be Einum, Semicolon Bookstore, and Chicago French Press. So if you enter and scan the QR code, you will be entered in automatically, and we will reach out to you this weekend. And you could win a $50 gift card to one of 3 local Black-owned businesses in Chicago. We're going to do also a Q&A session at the end of the event. So if you have any questions for FreeQuency, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. Okay, enough of me blabbering. I'm going to hand it over to FreeQuency.
All right. Hello. How's everybody doing tonight? I'm excited to be reading, and if you have any questions or anything, we're going to be having a Q&A towards the end of the show. So please feel free to save them till then, and then we can engage in dialogue together. So it is Black History Month, but low-key, I move through the world as if every month is Black History Month. So it's not like I'm going to have like a special selection of Black History Month poems for y'all. And I think with an artist like me, it doesn't necessarily matter because all of my work is actually centered in Blackness, because I think Blackness is such a rich pool to actually draw from. I think anything that exists in humanity, you can actually find within Blackness, because Blackness is that expansive and complex. So I'll take y'all through so many different things that have been coming up in the stillness of quarantine. I'm somebody who spent the last 2 or 3 years heavily on the road touring for my poetry, as well as the other job that I used to have working in reproductive justice. I was on the road a lot, attending conferences and doing different things. So I've been doing a lot of reflective writing in the last year or so, since we've all been kind of grounded by quarantine. And I think I'll take you all backwards through the time. So we'll start with some of the more recent ones and see where we go from there. So this first one was actually written in November, and it was written in, I think I began writing it probably like 3 or 4 years ago. There's a way that some poems, I start to write them, and then by the end of the night, they're finished. And then there are other ones that take some time to reveal themselves to me. And this one I began to write when I came across this poem called I Want a Dyke for President by Zoe Leonard. And it's a piece that's considered a landmark piece, like a piece that really was important to a particular generation of people, specifically those who were surviving through the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And this piece is one that was really calling out the political leadership at the time, and just being able to say why aren't we looking within ourselves for leadership in some of these different things. And I read the piece, and it was something that I wanted to sit with more, because I didn't quite agree with it, but I'd not yet quite developed my own politics around abolition or my own language around it. So I'll share with you first the piece by Zoe Leonard. It's called I Want a Dyke for President, and then I'll read you mine. So I Want a Dyke for President by Zoe Leonard. I want a dyke for president. I want a person with AIDS for president, and I want a fag for vice president, and I want someone with no health insurance, and I want someone who grew up in the place where the earth is so saturated with toxic waste that they didn't have a choice about getting leukemia. I want a president that had an abortion at 16, and I want a candidate who isn't the lesser of 2 evils, and I want a president who lost their last lover to AIDS, who still sees it in their eyes every time they lay down to rest, who held their lover in their arms and they knew that they were dying. I want a president with no air conditioning, a president who has stood in line at the clinic at the DMV, at the welfare office, and has been unemployed and laid off and sexually harassed and gay bashed and deported. I want someone who has spent the night in tombs and had a cross burned on their lawn and survived rape. I want someone who has been in love and been hurt, who respects sex, who has made mistakes and learned from them. I want a Black woman for president. I want someone with bad teeth, someone who has eaten hospital food, someone who cross-dresses and has done drugs and been in therapy. I want someone who has committed civil disobedience. And I want to know why this is impossible. I want to know why we started learning somewhere down the line that a president is always a clown, always a John, and never a hooker, always a boss, always a worker, always a liar, always a thief, and never caught. And so this next piece is called I Want a Dyke for, or Don't Want a Dyke for President. And it was originally written, like I said, I started to write it right after I heard this piece. I just wrote the line, I don't want a dyke for president. Then over the course of years, I started to write a stanza here and a stanza there. And it wasn't until November when a friend invited me to take part in a campaign that was called 45 Lies, that was, that if you're interested in writing, that you should definitely check out. As a bunch of different writers who wrote pieces that were supposed to be 45-second. They were supposed to choose one lie from the 45th president and write a 45-second response to it. And it was supposed to be calling out the complacency of specifically the hip hop generation in naming or not naming what had been happening in the Trump administration. And something about that hit me in a similar kind of way of not enough, that hit me with that same I want a dyke, that I don't want a dyke, or I want a dyke for president piece. And all of a sudden I found myself pouring out that poem, and these lines kept coming. And I was like, oh, I guess it's time for this poem to be written. So this piece is called 1 through 45 have lied. 46 through 100 will be no different. And it's in conversation with the piece, I Want a Dyke for President. Oh, silly humans, how quickly we forget. We who were once ruled by thrones and those who told us they were born to sit upon them. We, the descendants of those who overthrew dynasties and decapitated dictators. Who are we, in this moment, to not remember how much we've already overcome? How dare we dream so small? No, I don't want another 4 years of Trump. I don't want any Republican for president, but I don't want any Democrats either. No Democrats, no dykes, no people who've been unemployed. I don't want a Black woman in office, not Oprah, Ava, or even Michelle. No immigrants in the Oval. I don't care how many or which drugs they've done. I don't want a president at all. After all, what is a president but a small king? An emperor whose new clothes I cannot see. An agreement that we made collectively we can unmake just as easily. I pledge no allegiance to America just because white men defiled it with borders and called the result a country. I do not confuse dying to vote with dying for freedom, even though they meant the same thing at one time in history. I will not beg for a seat at a table whose legs are bent backs and we dine only on scarcity. I want us to dare to dream beyond the dictates of this dystopia, to admit that too many have just noticed the ending we feared was coming came long ago and we have simply been living in its shadow. I want us to admit more than this being a failure from the start, to say that America never was great and never can be, that sometimes the rot is so deep in the root that a pruning does not breed possibility, that any hope for a harvest lies in the fields that we sprouted from being raised and resown entirely. And I want to know why this isn't possible. I want to know why we started learning somewhere down the line that a president is always needed, that a country is always needed, that the police are always needed, that any of this has ever been and will always be needed. And I want to know how after slavery, genocide, colonialism, and all of the ways they've renamed the taking, how in the world that they convinced us that they knew how to run one better than we did or do. And I know it's sometimes hard to imagine that all of us can truly get free, but I need you to believe that we already are. I need you to believe that we always have been, no matter the master or the monarch, but only if we dared to dream beyond what we could see, only if we understood that reskinning or regendering the beast would never change rumbling in its belly. See, sometimes I daydream I will live to see the day that a child is born so free they will hear this poem and wonder what the hell a president even is. And I believe that we can do it. And I accept that we will be ourselves in the doing. I accept that there will be disagreement, that we will conflict as we unravel our imposed inhumanity, as we realize that we have less to learn than to unlearn in order to remember our collective body. And I want to know why this isn't possible. I want to know why we started learning somewhere down the line that a president is always needed, that a country is always needed, that the police are always needed, that any of this has ever been and will always be needed. And I want to know how we were asked to write to one lie from one president in one poem when the sum of this country's presidencies has been an untruth. 45 lies, yes, but so did 44, and so will 46, and so will our writing if we do not speak to the entirety of this. Oh, silly writers, how quickly we forget. We who were once ruled by thrones and those who told us they were born to sit upon them. We the descendants of those who overthrew dynasties and decapitated dictators. Who are we, in this moment, to not remember how much we've already overcome? How dare we write so small? And so, like I said, that piece was really written. I was having trouble for years articulating what was stopping me short with that I Want a Dyke for President piece. And it was really the fact that a person was daring to dream, but then they were just still so limited. They were dreaming within the container of what we already knew. And I think so much that has so much to do with the ways that we are just systematically kept from our internal selves, our internal passions, our dreams, to the point that our imaginations actually become limited to the scope of the world around us. And I say this because I have this niece, right? I was talking to my sister earlier today, and we were just laughing about the ways that like kids' minds are so, they're just made of imagination. As long as it makes sense to them, it doesn't really matter if it makes sense to the world. And so my niece was, what was she doing? I don't remember exactly what my niece was doing, but the story I shared with my sister was around the story that someone else shared with me around their niece, who had recently they were trying to like educate them around gender things. And so the niece had been asking, what's your pronouns? And the person was like, they, them. And the niece was like, cool. So they go back to making their letters or whatever they were doing. And then they get to their grandmother and they're like, does grandma also use they, them pronouns? And the person's like, no, grandma uses she, her pronouns. And the niece is like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense because grandma doesn't have glasses. It was just like, huh. This entire person's, this child's understanding of this entire person's gender is based on the fact that they wear glasses. And it really is a complete for that kid. That kid had no more questions, no follow-up, anything. And it just made me think about how little we can even imagine just something like gender, right? We can't even get people to go outside the he, she gender binary that we've all been born into to include one other gender that's just like they, right? Without understanding that gender is a spectrum and it's never just gonna be about including one or the other. If you open up the binary, you open it up to everything. And so this next piece that I am gonna share with y'all was written actually after reading this book called Wicked Flesh. Let me get you the full title. It was written by a friend of mine called Jessica Marie Johnson. It's called Wicked Flesh, Black Women, Intimacy, and Freedom in the Atlantic World. And it talks about the ways that Black women, Black femmes negotiated freedom as they were in the confines of just unfreedom, the unfreedom of enslavement. That was the transatlantic slave trade. And she asked me to put a piece together for her book reading and her book launch. And normally I don't do that well with those. I don't do well with commissions and kinds of things, but I know her and I know her thinking. And so I was really excited to be able to engage with her work. So this is written in reflection of Wicked Flesh, where I was just really challenged the entire book to be thinking about freedom and the complexity of freedom and the contradictions of freedom and the fluidity of freedom as well. Not just in our own bodies or genders of being, but all of the things. So let me pull this one up for you. All right. So it's called Lettering Freedom. Freedom is audacious and audible, adorned and archipelagic, a constellation even if you're following a North Star. It is a practice of refusal, autonomy that is continuously articulated and affirmed. It is a null value that we fill with ourselves that is beyond violence, beyond healing from violence, beyond legal status, free status, all status and stratification, beyond permission. It is belief, it is birthright and death wish. It is birthing and granting yourself the wish of rebirth through death. It is beyond the laws of men and the skin that encases them. It is belonging. It is a pact between our bones and bloods to only only belong to those we choose, and always first to choose ourselves. Freedom is contingent and contradictory. It changes over time and space, gender, bodies, and race. It is confounding and multiplicitous, contested yet conspicuous. Freedom claims you only as fiercely as you dare to claim it. It is carnal and caring, a colorful rainbow of experience, but mostly it is black and maroon. It defies definition, yet tasks us to try time and time again. It is defiant and directive, defined only by redefinition. It exceeds manumission and control. It is both embodied and exists beyond the flesh. It is erotic and ephemeral, excessive yet always just enough. It is fugitive and fictive, fluid and fractal. It is a fractured future of possibilities, but it is a future nonetheless. Freedom is, freedom is, freedom is, freedom is freer than the meaning of free that men and even women define. It is glorious and gorgeous, God-given, and aren't we all held hostage by our own holy? Freedom holds its boundaries firm and crosses borders like crosswalks. It is intimacy, scaled, and inelegant, indulging in the full span of humanity. It is illicit and inescapable, inevitable because it is internal. Freedom ain't no joke, and neither is saying that you want it. Don't forget that freedom kills, freedom has killed, freedom will kill. Freedom is a kaleidoscope of longing, a recalibration of being. It is mobility on your own terms, more than escaping unfreedom. It is mutable, it is me, it is mine, it is not mine, it is ours. It is a one-way route to us. It is plural and past the promise of empire. It is practice and it is a practice and a process. It is playful and pleasurably logic, precarious when divorced from possibility. It is a it is remade, remixed, and remembered, regenerated through generations, reproduced through reproduction. It is rarely diplomatic and never bureaucratic. It is shape-shifting and shows little concern for death in the pursuit of its own life. It is sweetly and satisfyingly wicked, self-possessed, transgressive and transcendent, tense and tender. It is the sovereign logic of self that is unruly and ungovernable, uneasy and uneven, unbearable if unpracticed. Freedom is an uneasy negotiation between sanity and imagination, where you are unsure which one you want to win. It is violent and volatile, but it is always worth defending and dying for, knowing that any lesser life is a kind of death anyway. We do not need to define freedom with our words, but with our ways of being in life and in death. It is the we, it is the Z, it is the you, it is the zenith of this failed project of inhumanity, and it is worth our zealous pursuit, whether or not we ever reach it, because in the process we become it. Freedom knows my name. I know this because freedom renamed me. It continues to call me even when I'm not brave enough to answer, especially when I'm not brave enough to answer. It calls my name, it calls my name, it calls my name, and continues to beckon me home. All right. Let's see what's up next. Ooh. Quarantine, like I said, y'all, was such an interesting period for me when it came down to writing and figuring out what was even just like in my personal archive, both referring to my body as a personal archive, and also just the archive of my jots, my plots from my journal, my notes here and there. And I've been kind of getting down on myself at a certain moment, and I was like, oh, I haven't been writing, because I had spent a lot of time in the last couple of years doing organizing work and youth work, and it's really difficult to be knee deep in both of them, because both of them require a full body, so only got 2 knees to put in there. So these next pieces that I'll share with you were just kind of based on some of the things I was experiencing as I was making this transition into doing out of youth work and into being an artist full time. So this one, I thought it was there and it's not. Give me 1 second. This one was written when I was just reflecting about my time, like I said, at that youth program, Young Women with a Vision. And give me 1 moment. I'm not sure why it's not coming up. Oh, maybe I'm not going to do that poem because it doesn't seem to want to be found. All right, well, I'll do this other one. This other one is I wrote because as I was in reflection, like I said, I was transitioning. I was really thinking about the importance of the program that I ran was specifically for Black girls here in New Orleans. And there was something I wanted to honor in the legacy of just Black women who had invested in me when I was growing up as a young Black girl, and the ways that there's a specific kind of care and trust that Black people have and cultivate for and amongst each other, and particularly when caring for Black children who don't have a chance to really to experience childhood to its fullness in countries like the United States. So I was thinking about that, the ways that as I was doing this youth program, the young people really invited me also into my own process of becoming and releasing and letting go. And it was right around the time I began my Saturn return, which is basically referred to as your second adolescence. So I'm over here hanging out with a bunch of adolescents while I'm going through my second adolescence, and it was all, whew, it was a lot. And I'm traveling a lot at the same time. So one day I'm sitting in the airport and I'm just like really overwhelmed by something. I couldn't even tell you what it was. I just know I was leaking a lot that period of my time. And I was trying to hold it all together, and I just started sobbing. And the story will be explained in this poem, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it at the end. So when I say only Black people know what other Black people need, I mean, once I was crying alone in an airport. At first, I tried to sob silently, tried to sweep my tears back with the brooms brimming the tip of my eyelids. But all at once, I broke the dam that was my pride and cried so loud and with such lonely and longing that every white person around me turned away in disgust and shame from me. When I say only Black people know what other Black people need, I mean a Black woman a few seats away from me let her daughter wander over to my waterfall, tap me on my knees and ask me why I was crying. I looked up at her mother who smiled at me. I looked down at the child who had the universe in her questioning eyes, and I told it the truth. I told this galaxy that I did not know. And somehow she understood, and she stayed. She stayed until I stopped crying. And after I stopped crying, this woman, she came to me and she told me that her daughter knew to come to me because we always seem to know what we need, even if we cannot give it to ourselves. And this next one is an unfinished piece. I really struggled to write this summer, actually. Like I said, in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of frontline organizing work, but I found myself this last year really called to just like a lot of internal rest and reflection. And then it's like the world reopened, the wound that was the world reopened. And I couldn't really write, even though I had found myself writing a lot the last time this wound opened. And it was because of where I was positioned. And at this stage in my life, I was really just spending a lot of time mentoring young people in my life. And then somewhere in it, Oluwatoyin Salah was killed. And I broke open myself in that moment. And often when that happens to me, the way that I process things is through writing. So yeah, and then very soon after that, Brayla Stone was killed. So this piece is unfinished. I don't know if I'll ever finish it because it's hard to go back to moments like those, and editing makes you do that. But it's an untitled piece written sometime in summer of 2020. I will never forget for allowing those who have survived long hurt in their short lives to be taken from us first and spoken about last. To allow them to be put down while living and be put down as a form of death. To allow their bodies to sink back into a living earth as we neglect to revive their beings by at least allowing our tongues to turn to tombstone and offering our mouths to hold their history in our way our hands never could when they were alive. Toyin, you were so young with experiences so ancient they can only sadly be called human. But I'm tired of calling them human, because to call them human is to accept a humanity that took yours long before it killed you, then still killed you. Toyin, you said this man, he tried to steal your jewel, but that he could not because you were a rock. But you were not. You were a mountain and a monument to survival. Toyin, they gave you the name Oluwatoyin, meaning God is worthy to be praised. Yet somehow we of traditions that give names to match the lives we hope for, we fail to recognize the divine we were blessed with upon your birth. We chose to see you only as Christ-like after we had forsaken you, after your slaughter and your resurrections online. Toyin, my name is Mwende. It means the loved one. When I die, I hope I will never have to ask in my haunting why they wouldn't just treat me like my name in death or call it out in my death. Question, do you know how many Black girls receive their first public praise only when mourning? Question, do you know how many men who called her name after her death, how many of them would have called her out of it as she walked by them on the street with her proud stride and her aching heart? Do you think she would have been able to tell the difference between them and the one who eventually killed her? A wolf in shepherd's robes, a demon who disguised himself as a man of God, who killed a girl named God is worthy to be praised and confessed to the sacrilege as simple as a Sunday prayer. When we say protect Black girls, we mean from strangers. When we say protect Black girls, we mean from yourselves. When we say protect Black girls, we mean Toyin had already lived through many deaths before she left her body, and still she managed to resurrect herself with her worth without your praise. When we say protect Black girls, we mean those on the front lines. When we say Black girls, we mean their lives are on the line. When we say protect Black girls, we mean their lives are the front lines. We mean that if every cop, sheriff, and ICE agent retired tomorrow, we would still wake up to news of a dead Black girl, and many would still refuse her the offering of their tongues to be turned as fresh tombstones. So say it with me now. Oluwatoyin, God is worthy to be praised. Oluwatoyin, God is worthy to be praised. Oluwatoyin, God is worthy to be praised. When we say protect Black girls and Black girl magic, but we forget to include the girls. I know that the magic you speak of is incomplete. Parlor tricks that you try to impose on our personhood. It is fool's gold that is already fading. When you say Black girl magic, make sure you don't mean how some are put into boxes, sawed into pieces, and thrown into rivers, disappeared behind clouds of gun smoke. Brayla Stone was a 17-year-old child, but in the lifespan of a Black trans girl, that means she was already middle-aged. Can you imagine a midlife crisis before you can even vote? An adulthood you don't get to see in life but is forced upon you in death. The headlines read, another Black trans woman killed. But 2 weeks ago, we buried your big sister Toyin at age 19, and we all seem to know she was a baby. See, all I really want to know is when I'll be able to stop writing poems like this. Is how come the world we knew ended but still left so much of its violence behind and left it bound in the bones of my daughters who I'm brave enough only to name when I have to mourn them, only to hear the echo of my own bitter throat as I repeat the question over and over again. When will my daughters be mourned? When will my daughters be mourned? When will my daughters be mourned? And there I go again, asking all the wrong damn questions. What I really mean to say is, when will I stop writing these poems because I do not have daughters to mourn because my daughters will be alive? All right, so right after that summer, August happened. And August is a month, for those of you who don't know, I'm saying we, like, it's a secret society. It's just Black people who like to freedom dream. There's a practice called Black August that was started originally as a practice by political prisoners in the San Quentin. They use the language of concentration camp, but we most commonly refer to them as prisons now. Around George Jackson and his incarceration and his murder, his assassination by the state. And people engaged in a month-long practice of fasting, study, all sorts of things to just deepen their own commitment towards whatever rigor they needed to engage in order to head towards Black liberation. And one of the things that was started in 2007 by someone named Mama Nia over at Spirit House was a practice of writing haikus. And it was started in a conversation with someone Mama Nia was talking to who was visiting somebody who was incarcerated. And the person was saying, you know, when you're incarcerated, you have to make a practice of finding joy in the small spaces. So these haikus then became part of a Black August practice of trying to practice liberation in microdoses, in these small amounts of spaces, and in this case, through liberatory writing. So I'll read you a series of haikus that I wrote for this past August, in no particular order. So, and Black August is also a time to like honor ancestry and lineage. So some of these will be in reference to like different Black writers and thinkers and activists who I just like and appreciate. So this first one is called Auntie Audrey Reminds Me, and that's in reference to Audre Lorde. You don't have to know in order to understand, you have to listen. The second one is called For June from July. June is reference to June Jordan, and I'm July. I'm born in July. I'm a big Cancer baby. And June Jordan has this piece called Poem About My Rights, where she says, I am not wrong, wrong is not my name. So For June from July. I've been wrong and still wrong ain't never been my name. Pronounce me correct, pronounce me holy, won't answer to all I'm called, act accordingly. Train your timid tongues, sound out all my syllables. I've been a mouthful. Too much to swallow, hard to digest. I am all I be. This next one is called Zora told us in reference to Zora Neale Hurston, who has a quote that says, "Not all skin folk are kinfolk." And this, if I'm remembering correctly, was written on the day that, was it that Kamala Harris was like announced as VP candidate or something? I think so. So title is Zora Told Us. Been told about skin folk, can't root for everyone black if they don't root back. Assuming comrades only urges undoing, kinfolk is a verb. This next one is called Say It With Your Sternum. Speak sweetness out loud, wishes float like seeds on wind, seeking fertile soil. And that was in reflection to the fact, I really have this, like, I think one of my like prevailing world beliefs is the idea that words create worlds. So like what you say, even what you think, even if you're not saying it out loud, like you saying it to yourself if you're thinking it, that really has the power to shape your internal world and your external world. And again, this entire world that we live in is just a series of other people's imaginations brought into action and fruition. So, you know, think sweeter thoughts, we might have a sweeter world out here. This one is called While in the Garden. I got back to being able to garden during the stillness again of quarantine. I finally stopped traveling enough where I was able to maintain more than like succulents. And I killed a bunch of succulents too. That's how bad it got. So title is While in the Garden. Soul slips into soil. Browns bend the border between. I reroot myself. This next one is called Would You Recognize Magic If You Saw It? If you were it. Magic surrounds us. There is no ordinary, there's just familiar. And this one was in reflection of just like the majesty of like the mundane, right? I think during quarantine, again, I had been traveling, I had been moving around so much, I'd really just not been able to just be like still in like just in my shit for a minute. And then I was just sitting here like, wow, there's just, the life that I lived when I was on tour just out there was so magical, and I didn't even notice it because it became kind of like an everyday sort of thing. And so if you're no matter what happens, if it happens every day, it kind of loses its charm, it loses its spark, it loses its magic. And it just made me think about too when I'm reading like sci-fi novels and different things, and you know, there's entire societies where it's like magic is just like a thing that people do. It's not special to them. They're just like, yeah, I mean, those are people that have magic, those are people that don't. So it's like even the concept of magic is just like something that we don't understand, right? Like if you had somebody from like the 1800s or some shit time travel to right now and see like a car moving based on their frame of reference, they'd be like, I know what that is. That's magic. So anyway, this one is called Reminders for My Impatient Self, because you know, sitting still isn't all like sunshine and rainbow. Sometimes just like, God damn. So don't force what won't come. What is for you is either coming or waiting. This next one, first time a whisper, next time a screeching siren, last time a lesson. And this last one I'll share with y'all is a birthday reflection. Like I told you, I'm a July baby, I'm a little Cancer baby. I'm actually on the cusp of Cancer and Leo, so it's a lot going on over here. And I was just doing a lot of reflections about what it meant to be water. And what it meant to be an ocean. I was talking about therapists, and my therapist was like, yeah, you refer to yourself as an ocean a lot, but you know, people leave a lot of shit in the ocean. I was like, well, good point. So, study the tides of the ocean shored by your skin. Each ripple, each wave. Not all water is meant to quench others' dry throats or be waded through. Not everything left behind in our waters will be offerings. All right. I'm trying to make sure my time is good too. I'm one of those poets who could just like talk for the rest of my life. So let's see, it's 7:35. I'm gonna do another 10 minutes or so, and then we can check in, see if there's any questions and answers. And then if not, I will just close this out with some more poems, because I told you I've been writing, just sitting around writing, being in my feelings. It's a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle. Let's see. This next one. To do that one. Yeah, this one was written in reflection of just New Orleans. I've been living in New Orleans since I graduated from high school, and it's the longest I've ever lived anywhere. And I've just moved around, you know, every like 4 to 6 years when I was younger. So home was just not really something I was just like deeply invested in a geographic sense. Like I was one of those people who had to define home in a different kind of way because I did not grow up in the same place, the same house, the same neighborhood, the same whatever. So New Orleans is something that I had to, I was asked, the person who put together this anthology of New Orleans writers called me and was like, do you want to be part of this anthology? It's for New Orleans writers. Are you a New Orleans writer? And I was like, I guess so. And we just kind of had a conversation about the concept of home. And by the end of that phone call, I was like, oh yeah, New Orleans is my home. So I wrote this piece. It's called Ode to New Orleans, and then crosses out New Orleans and it says Ode to Home. And it starts with I forget what they're called, but they're like these little inserts that they put at the beginning of poems. That's like somebody else's quote. So home is epitaph. That's what they're called, or something. Epitaph, whatever. Home is not where you were born. Home is where all your attempts to escape cease. And it's by a writer named Naguib Mahfouz. So, 1. And when I came to you, mid-escape, suitcases unclasped, baggage spilling out of every seam, I was 18 years searching, 18 years of not finding or being found, 18 years of doubt and displacement, of being taken from and to my next home, and my next home, and my next home, and my next home, and my next home, till I forgot that home had meaning beyond movement, beyond the in-between, beyond grasping for memories too shallow to settle into facts of the past. You were the first place that I felt familiar in the foreign, the first place that asked me to let go. You told me the river could handle my load, and only in the release did I realize how much hurt I'd held through the hollowing. 2. When I was a teenager, my mother said, New Orleans reminds me of home. For years, she echoed in my ears in searching heart until I stepped foot in this village and saw chickens directing traffic like arrogant, well-dressed crossing guards, until I tried to refuse a meal only for the plate to be piled higher with the same expectation that it come back clean, until I walked out of a house timid and tentative to find myself swirled in the chaos of joy that is a Sunday street in New Orleans. 3. But it wasn't just the second lines, it was the second chance at home, the first chance to choose it. I didn't know what I was walking into, but for the first time in a long time, I decided I wanted to keep walking forward and toward, like I had just realized that life was a gathering of the living and my invitation had been waiting for me right here all along. Ooh, and then try something new with y'all. So I do this thing sometimes where I write, and then I'm just like, writing is such a deeply personal practice for me. I don't sometimes know what I should and should not. I'm like, do people, would they read this? Is it just me and my feelings? Who knows? But I started writing this like series of, I guess they're like short stories that are just reflection. Like I said, some weird shit just be happening in my life very often. And when I share them with people, I just kind of tell them like they're like casual stories, and I'm just watching people's faces react to them. And I'm just like, yeah, this is not as casual as I think. Or it's just the way I tell stories. I don't know. Either way, I started writing up these stories that are just like, this is some shit that happened to me today that got me all up in my feelings. And people have been like, word, you should write short stories. So I'm going to share a short story with y'all. Give me a second to find it. It is called The House with the Door That Leads to Nowhere. And it's about what happened to me last week. All right. I think it should be fine within the time we have left. So this is called The Door with the House That Leads to Nowhere. Last week, around 8 p.m., my friend was giving me a lift home. In addition to my body, they were also helping me transport a bin and a few loose items. A few things to note about my block. The street I live on is a narrow, short, semi-busy one-way with two-sided parking. Folks who park on the right side have to at least partially position their cars on the grassy patch between the street and sidewalk to avoid cars grazing them. During the day, the street is mostly devoid of vehicles, but the moment the clock strikes 5, everyone on my block speed racers home, and within 1 hour, the street is packed solid. I don't have a car, so I'm more amused than bothered by the parking situation. I've developed a people-watching routine where some evenings I sit by my window, smoking and marveling at the consistency of those who work a 9 to 5 in this brand new same old world. I have no idea what any of my neighbors do, but I can tell you who gets home first by how prime their parking spot is relative to their front door. On the days when the people who are employed to collect trash come, the parking situation becomes even more chaotic. I watch people regularly get out of their cars to move their trash cans in order to be able to park. Anyway, as my friend makes the turn onto the sliver of the street that I live on that evening, it's clear that most everyone's work-home schedule has not changed. There's no parking on my side of the street that would allow anyone with me and my friend's Raggedy Ann arms and style of strength to be able to carry a bin comfortably. My friend considers partially blocking my next-door neighbor's driveway for the brief unload. I tell them not to because I've noticed that my neighbor's wife is an atrocious driver and she usually bumper carts her way out of her driveway around this time. I turn and notice there's an open, empty spot almost directly across the street from my house. The spot happens to be in front of the house with a door that leads to nowhere, but I don't think too much of it. We go to the park, which in this instance is a parallel parking situation because of a trash can and was once a grassy patch between the sidewalk and street. My friend isn't the best parallel parker, so I offer to move the trash can so they can just pull up in reverse into the spot instead of having to maneuver. Now let me take a moment here to tell you about the house with the door that leads to nowhere. The house with the door that leads to nowhere is a 2.5-story house that somehow conjures thoughts of a storybook, but only if the story is a tragedy and takes place in the Twilight Zone version of Candyland. For instance, in front of the house are 2 trees that look like distant younger relatives of the Whomping Willow, who got so tired of growing leaves and bark that they just decided one day to stop, and they haven't looked back since. I mean, they are so unnaturally smooth that they look like they are sponsored by Nair, the Nature Edition. I gave this house this name because its topmost floor has a door with no steps and no porch that if you opened it and stepped out, you'd crash through the garage and be jumped by a bunch of cats for ruining their vacation home. When I first moved here, it took me days to realize that anyone lived there. This is partially because I regularly saw no less than a dozen black cats chilling on the roof of the garage that looks like it's attached to the house with a door that leads to nowhere with safety pins. I logically assumed that the cats rented out not just the garage, but the whole apartment, until one day I saw an older white man. I don't know why, but I really feel like he's Italian. For some reason, I've learned to differentiate Italians the way I can continental Africans, but most of the rest of the whites look like they climbed from the same peak of the Caucasus Mountains to me. I saw a white man moving a trash can out of the street onto a garbage day and go back into the house with a door that leads to nowhere. He was totally unbothered by the 6 or so cats who flocked to him as familiars, but I was still surprised when he opened the door and walked back in. I get out the car expecting to step onto a green patch of grass and instead step into what appears to be 57 years worth of cat shit that's been turned into a putrid stew by the rains of the week. Through the use of my facial aromatic assessment tool, I conclude there's no less than 6 generations worth of cat shit in this outdoor litter box I've just introduced my shacks to. Usually I don't notice things like this because I wear boots 98% of the time, but the week before I was pulling off my regular boots by the heel, and instead of pulling them off, I accidentally pulled the entire sole off as easy as a banana peel. Due to my tragic podiatric misinvestment, I now find myself donning navy blue shacks with an orange trim that are now further trimmed by feline feces. I breathe deep and pretend not to care. Unfortunately, I notice more because my deep inhale is filled with the scent of potentially prehistoric cat droppings. I hold my breath instead and direct my friend into the parking spot. I open the front door to gather my belongings when something says to my back in an aggressive tone, "Excuse me." I snap up and look over both shoulders, settling on the trash can I just moved. I started to wonder if inhaling enough cat shit can get you high because cats eat catnip, and someone once told me in high school that smoking enough catnip can get you high. I continue to stare at the rude-ass trash can, daring its lips to open and say something again, but its scary ass doesn't. I turn my head to my friend, who has a confused look on their face. They heard it too, but they shrug and put their hands up. I shrug and shake my head as I turn back to the car to gather my things. But the moment I turn back again, the rude-ass trash can hits me with an even ruder and louder, "Excuse me." This time I look over both shoulders and settle on the opposite side of the trash can I moved, where there's only other trash cans. As I'm looking over at them, wondering what would possess multiple trash cans to talk so rude to me, I hear, "Excuse me," again, and finally locate the voice coming from what appears to be the floating voice of a ghost named Karen behind a slightly cracked door. I only assume it's a ghost named Karen because her "excuse me" sounded like it was about to be followed by a demand to see the manager in whatever circle of hell she'd been to. As my eyes adjust to the scene unfolding in the dark doorway of the house with the door that leads to nowhere, I realize what I'm seeing is not a ghost, just an unusually pale white woman whose paleness is amplified by the streetlights outside and the lack of lighting inside. As I'm trying to internalize that there's been another person living in the house the entire time who is potentially not left in so long that she's actually become glow in the dark, this woman begins a tirade against me and my friend. She begins by telling us we're in her husband's parking spot. I try to interject and say my bad in a surprised and apologetic tone, looking around for the no parking sign we may have missed in the dark. But there isn't one. I look again to make sure we aren't blocking her driveway. We aren't, because she doesn't have one. As I'm looking and trying to apologize in an intentionally soft tone, she's raising her voice and getting increasingly rude with what she's saying. She asks me if I'm the person living across the street and tells me again we're in her husband's parking spot and that should never touch her trash can. My friend sits in the car fuming and starting to argue back, appalled at how this woman is speaking to me. Meanwhile, it's been a long day and I'm still trying to figure out what the fuck she's saying we did wrong and whether we can just keep some kind of peace because I live across the street from her. This woman, though, she continues and continues and continues, saying we had better move right now because her husband is about to be back. She concludes in a nasty and patronizing tone that you should know better. Now, for storytelling purposes, it's important to note that a new character is introduced in this moment who is of me, but is not quite me. So far, we've been introduced to me, my friend, the black cat barbershop dozenette, what I thought was a mouthy trash can, and the actual trash can of a glow-in-the-dark human being who was yelling at me from her floating ass head. The me so far in this story is a me that most are familiar with. Smiley old, wide-eyed, starry-eyed Mwende of the House Kitwiwa. We are mostly a bashful, mild-mannered house. We enjoy relative, colorful calm and believe that most things can be sorted through listening, asking the right questions, and being brave enough to be honest with our answers. Our house crest is a singing mammoth sunflower, drinking spiked tea and surfing on a giant wave made of tears of joy and grief at daybreak. This me that belongs to this house is not a 0 to 100 kind of person. They're more of a -7 to 44 and maintain an average daily rate of 37.9987 or -2. Long ago, in the basement of my rib cage, just above my gut, a bitch burrowed into my bones and made a nest of nastiness that she calls her throne. She doesn't like most people, and I don't allow her out much, and both of us are relatively happy with things. She too is not a 0 to 100 kind of person. She's more of a always on 111 kind of person. She's exhausting, and I sometimes think of getting rid of her entirely, but she's saved my ass more times than I care to count. I trust that bitch has got more than I trust my new and improved kombucha-lined intestines if shit hits the fans. Also, this bitch is like Voldemort. Once you say her name, it's too late to unsay it and uncall her forward. The spell has been spoken, and this bitch got good ears. This woman calls for that bitch by name when she told me I should have known better. The moment she did, I, Mwende of the House Kitwiwa, first of their name, aspiring shooting star and braider of lemongrass, was pulled from service. All I could hear as I was being benched was this bitch's loud-ass voice saying something like, "Who the fuck are you talking to like that?" Before I disappeared completely, I hear this bitch crawling out of our throat full steam ahead, shouting, "Say some shit like that again," like she's requesting her favorite song. I wish I could tell you more about what happened, because at least 2 of my neighbors poked their heads out. But alas, that bitch doesn't really like to have me around when she does her thing. She is thoroughly mean, but she's only like that because she's my tenderness's frontline defender. At some point, that bitch finishes whatever she be doing, sits back in the car, and slams the door. My friend asks me what I want to do. I asked them not to ask me right now, because low-key, that bitch ain't fully gone yet, and all she wants to do is gather all the black cats in the neighborhoods that be chilling and hurl them one by one at her pale-ass floating head, which is now peering at us from the corner of a window. Side note, I do not condone animal abuse at all, and since all the cats are black, it would probably violate my principles on some level. I just want to clarify whose thoughts, rationalizations, and ideations you're reading, because again, it's not I, Mwende. I'm just reporting what was echoing in the chambers of our collective mind once I was allowed back into space. So, a few minutes later, after doing some deep breathing and negotiation with all of myselves, I relay our decision to my friend. Fuck it, let's just unload. Instead of our original quick in and out, we spend hours inside decompressing. Because my friend and I were recently on FaceTime as they experienced a similar incident involving the police, where a white man started aggressing her over a public parking spot in front of his house. We end up staying at my spot until well past midnight, and initially I'm low-key preparing myself for an irate older Italian man to appear at my door. Remember, the floating Karen's husband was allegedly coming home any second, and the way this woman spoke, it was like he was the lead parking investigator for the city of New Orleans. My friend finally departs, and I stand in the doorway to make sure they make it to their car safely. As they pull off, I look around for the red car I know to belong to the older Italian man who never came to the door to demand his parking spot. I locate his whip parked a few houses down on an entire empty parking lot that he could actually claim as his personal parking lot. Not a single spot, an entire parking lot, because only one other car parks there inconsistently. I drop my jaw and just cackle at the caucasity of it all. Hours later, I wake up at the crack of dawn like I usually do and open the front door to greet the day. As I'm yawning, I see his red car parked back in front of the house with the door that leads to nowhere. The bitch in my bones points out that I work from home, and if we wanted, we could begin saving for a car just so she can park it in his parking spot every day until his floating head of a wife apologizes. That bitch is not rational per se, but she always does get points for creativity and long-term visioning and investment. I smile and shake my head at her. She smiles back and checks my bank account balance as I make her a thank you breakfast. The wildest part of this story, a week later, my shacks are still outside on the front porch reeking of prehistoric feline feces despite the torrential downpour of the last week. I might have to fork over another $17 to $29 plus tax for a new pair. And that's the end of the story. So we have about 10 minutes left. I don't know how you want to do the Q&A, but we could do that. And then if not, well, I could just do a couple poems to close.
Yeah, of course. So I do have some questions, but I will say if you have any questions, to post them in the chat and we can answer them. But so one question I do have is, can you give advice to someone who wants to get into writing and like how they can start?
Yeah, yo, writers write. Like people really think there's like some mystical like little secret to it, but it's like writers write. Like that story I just read to you, I just had to find it on my Facebook. That's where it's published. It's not like some secret formula where it's like, oh, now this has become legitimate. It's words, and wherever once you put them out there, it's been written. Then you are a writer. There is no formula. There is no degree that you got to get. There is no certification. There's no person who's going to be able to tell you, yes, Simba, now you have become a writer. Like all you got to do is write. And the thing about writing, it's one of those things that like the more you write, the better you will get at writing. So yeah, just write. Turn it into a practice, do it as often as makes sense to you. There's like this idea that if you don't write every day, you're not a serious writer. And I think that's bullshit. I think if you don't write when you feel called to write, then you're not a serious writer. But as long as you are like honoring yourself when you feel called to write and not trying to constrict yourself by the form either. Like I just read y'all a short story. Allegedly, I'm a poet. I don't know. It's whatever. As long as it comes out, it comes out. So the best advice that I give people is that writers write.
I love that. I can't. I mean, like, I feel like I can't write, but like now, I'm inspired now to like actually do it.
Yeah, I'm really like focusing on this story on the Facebook thing because this started because I had such a day where I walked home. I live like 10 blocks from Whole Foods, right? And I walked to Whole Foods and I walked back and like 7 blocks away from home, a torrential downpour happened. And I've started to live in a movie where it's like my bags all tore because Whole Foods bags are made of like recycled paper. And I got home and I was just like, wow, that felt like a story. And so I just wrote it on my Facebook. And then people were like, yo, you should write more stories. I would read these. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. So if you don't share your writing, you might not even know you're a good writer. So I would say write it and share it.
Love that. So we have another question. How do you get motivation? Sometimes I get burnout easily. How do I get out of this slump?
Well, I would say one of the things that really helped me was I have a therapist who's an expressive arts therapist, and they were really helpful to help me stop being so down on myself as a creative. So I used to be like, oh, I'm a lazy writer and I write every day, blah, 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 be in my slumps. I procrastinate a lot. And she was like, what if procrastination is part of your creative process, right? Like stop thinking of creating as just being those like moments of like good, feel good spontaneity where something is produced or comes out of you. That's like a very hyper capitalistic way of thinking about creation. Instead, think about like, what are the conditions that I need in order to foster creativity, and then work on creating those conditions. And then I guarantee you the creativity comes. We are just imaginative and creative creatures already. Most of the times we're just not in the right context or conditions to really support our creativity. So how I get motivation is like, I clean my damn house. Like, I know the number one thing that distracts me from writing is when I feel like I need to clean some shit. So if I know I need to write on Wednesday, I start cleaning on Monday so that by Wednesday, my damn house is clean. So that when I sit down to write, I'm not even distracted. I'm like, damn, I'm in writing mode. I feel good. My house looks good. I got my incense. Like, so figure out what are the things that actually get you motivated. I have to eat. If I don't eat, I don't write well if I'm on an empty stomach. I also don't write well if I'm like fully stuffed. So I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna be writing, eat a meal that's not gonna like knock you out, and that will motivate you to write more than just like a real nice meal that makes you just want to take a nap. That's gonna motivate me to take a nap. That's what a really nice meal does. So be clear about it's about getting to know yourself as a person and as a creative. So what motivates you? What keeps you from writing? And then battle those things, and I guarantee you the process will just become easier. Writing, I think, in creativity is less about like trying to do things and more like getting the things out of the way that keep you from doing those things, if that makes sense. So, and I would say the same thing I said to the first person. I don't know what kind of medium you created, or even if you're talking about writing, you could just be talking about general motivation, but it's like, just do some shit. Just write. Just create. Just do whatever. Don't be attached to outcome. I love Yoda in one of the movies is like, do or do not. There is no try. Like, stop trying to do shit and just do shit. If you know you can't do a lot right now because you're in a slump, don't try to do a lot. Do the little shit that you know you can do, because then you can be like, oh shit, look at me. I did that little thing. I'm all set. You can't be in a slump if you're doing things. They don't have to be monumental. But if you set your goals to a way that you can meet them so that you're not setting yourself up for failure, that's how I usually get myself out of a slump. So, yeah.
Perfect. Next question we have is, who inspires you the most?
My grandma, my shosho is what we call her. So she's like, 93 or something years old. And both of my grandmas, actually, the other one's like 102. They just old, and they grew up in like colonial Kenya, and just they're so fascinated by me as just like a creature, because they could never live the kind of lives that I'm living, and I'm so fascinated by them because I don't think I could have lived their lives. But I'm so inspired to live my own life fully, because I know that my life has been bought and paid for by the sacrifices that other people made for their dreams, because their context and conditions could not allow them to live their lives and their dreams fully. Like, I might be the first generation in my family that really is able to follow my dreams, and that is inspirational to me. So I'm really inspired by the people in my family and all that they've been able to do, that have allowed me to do and be myself. And I really honor them with my work and my words, and choosing to just be myself because I have that choice. And I'm very clear in conversations with my grandmother, who again is not just growing up under colonialism, but is also growing up under like African traditional patriarchy and just the limitations of choice that women and girls had when it came to opportunity and possibility. I'm like, damn, how dare I not be myself when I have the choice, you know? So she really inspires me, because she's like she's like at peace with her life, regardless of all she's had to do and struggle. She's at peace, and I'm so inspired by that. And I know that she's shared that part of what brings her peace is that we all get to be ourselves. So, yeah.
So much that was beautiful, you know, like that really touched me, because like I feel the same way about my like grandparents. Like, they really like inspire me to like do what I do today. So I totally feel with you on that. But if we do not have any more questions, does not seem like it, so we'll end it. I just want to thank you so much for being here and doing an amazing, just reading so many amazing works. Like, so touched, and like I was receiving messages throughout, so many people in the comments, I can bring them up, were saying how beautiful and how everything is so powerful. They love it, and they just very much like agreed with like a lot of things you were saying, especially like talking about your hometown and everything. Like, they really like everyone, like a lot of students watching or within the Paul community really liked it. So thank you so much for being here. I very much appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank y'all for having me. And please, I don't know if you can put my website in the comments. If y'all want to follow along with the work, my work is, I have like a newsletter that I send out to people. So you might be able to find these stories that are like on my Facebook. I usually send those out to my newsletter. So yeah, go on and stay in touch in whatever way makes sense. Thank y'all for hosting me and having me. And yeah, I hope y'all have a good rest of your semester.
Thank you. Yeah, so just wanted to let you guys know that we are holding a contest. So if you are interested in winning a gift card from 3 local Black-owned businesses in Chicago, you'll be entered in a chance to win one of them. So these businesses are Item, Semicolon Bookstore, and Chicago French Press. So make sure you register at the link below or check in, and you'll be entered, and we'll contact you this week. So thank you so much for watching. Yeah, have a great night and stay tuned. Check our D-Hub for more DAB events coming up within the next couple of days and within the next week. Thank you.